Scott, Israel is, as you said, not stopping this genocide. They're not relinquishing. But at the same time, even with the reprieve that they've been extended through the fall of Syria, it seems like this, what seems to be just this endless forever war that it's gotten itself in on all of these fronts, that seems to be expanding as well as it continues this onslaught. Before the fall of Syria, we talked about Israel being militarily defeated. In many ways, I still see this because Yemen is able to pierce the Iron Dome. Israel is thinking really hard about Iran still. And then you have Hezbollah waiting in the wings as this ceasefire is set to expire. What do you think about this position of Israel being militarily defeated?
Well, again, we have to go back to the ceasefire that was signed or entered into in November that brought an end to the fighting in southern Lebanon, northern Israel. The Israelis are the ones that sued for the ceasefire, pushed for the ceasefire. Why? Because when they sent two of their best brigades, the 7th Armored Brigade and the Golani Brigade, into southern Lebanon, they got beat by Hezbollah on the ground. They were unable to achieve their objectives. They had to retreat under fire, and they took casualties. And right about that time, the Israeli command realized that our military is broken. You know, we've been fighting over a year, and we're just worn out morally, physically, materially. You know, our equipment hasn't been maintained properly, and the troops are just losing the will to fight. And that's why they opted for this ceasefire. They pushed for it. And Hezbollah accepted because Hezbollah is under a lot of pressure. I mean, even though the Israelis weren't doing so good on the ground, you know, they had inflicted some harm on Hezbollah through the air. The murder of Hassan Nasrallah, the decapitation of much of the leadership below him, the pagers that gutted the mid-level management of Hezbollah, and then some. Apparently, the Israelis had people on the inside of Hezbollah who were feeding back targeting information, and the Israelis were hitting some very valuable targets and doing harm. So, you know, Hezbollah didn't make the offer for the ceasefire, but when it was presented to them, they were placed under pressure by the Lebanese government to accept it. So Hezbollah did accept it, but Hezbollah wasn't defeated. That's the point we have to make. All Israel did is get a ceasefire, and then, you know, Assad fell, and so we have the perception of Israeli strength now because they're punching into basically an empty bag. They took over a significant part of the Syrian Golan Heights, but there was no resistance. They moved up along Mount Hermon, along the the border with Lebanon, to be 20 kilometers from, no resistance. They've moved into the south, no resistance. So it looks good on the map. You get a lot of flags flying, but there's no resistance. This isn't southern Lebanon where, you know, they tried to take certain villages and they were getting, you know, beat back. It's still a tired army. It's still an overextended army. It's still an army taking casualties in Gaza every day. You know, our headlines are dominated, to the extent that we cover Gaza anymore, are dominated by, you know, the murder, ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people, targeting hospitals, refugee camps, humanitarian convoys, and just women and children being killed by the score every day. You know, that's happening, but at the same time, you know, every day, 1, 2, 3 Israeli soldiers killed, others wounded, a never ending. They're not at peace there. They may have leveled this entire place, but and if the latest reporting is accurate, Hezbollah has actually recruited like 12,000 fighters in the last several months.
I think it was Hamas, actually. I think you're talking about.
I'm sorry, you're right. Hamas had recruited.
Yeah. Hezbollah is pretty big. I mean, Hezbollah is really big. But
no, I'm talking about Hamas.
Yes,
Hamas
yes.
Recruited, tens of thousands of fighters, and they may actually have more fighters today than they did when the conflict started. Level of training unknown, probably not as good. But hey, if you're supposed to be physically defeating your enemy, and your enemy's still resisting, killing people, and they're getting bigger, yeah, it sends a number of red flags. For instance, if you have a humanitarian disaster amongst the civilians, how is Hamas continuing to supply tens of thousands of fighters? Where is their supply chain coming from? I think Hamas has more resources and capabilities than and are able to reconstitute. Sinwar was obviously in a difficult position near the end. They say he hadn't eaten for I think 4 days leading up to that, and so maybe they had a situational uh, reality in one localized area where Sinwar was. That's what drove him out of the tunnels to be fighting. But Hamas has the ability to, first of all, the Israelis, they're like what we did in Vietnam. I mean, Gaza has in many ways become their Vietnam. Anybody who, if I say the Ashau Valley, how many times did we launch attacks across the Ashau Valley, to seize Hill 861 or, the Long Trang Byangpu line along the River Chi. I'm making all this stuff up. But, and then you achieve it, soldiers are dead, and then you fall back. And then the Viet Cong come right back in, the NVA come in, dig in, and next thing you know, you're launching the attack again. That's happening to the Israelis. They come in and they secure a place, but you can't stay there. They've blown everything up. There's nothing. So you run around, you do what you have to do, and then you leave, and Hamas comes right back, and you have to fight. And the Israelis are now fighting for the same terrain, for the fourth or fifth time. That's demoralizing the extreme. So the Israelis aren't in, and remember, their economy hasn't recovered. It's not as though the Israeli economy, the southern port of Eilat is still shut down because of the Houthi. So the idea that Israel wants to drag this thing out. Now you have some Israelis talking about, attacking Iran. It's conceivable that Israel would overextend itself and achieve the Palestinian victory for the Palestinians, meaning that the Israelis defeat themselves. I don't think Trump is going to let that happen. I think the Trump administration is going to try and bring about an end to the fighting, one way or the other.
As you said, Ansar Allah, the Houthis, Yemenis, they control the Red Sea, and they control the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They control this whole coastal region, which Israel and the United States and the UK, they think they can bomb their way out of this. We had Ansar Allah target the Ben Gurion airport, the power plant in Haifa, and there are reports that they have, through their missile systems, forced the USS Harry Truman, that massive aircraft carrier, to escape out of the area about 1,500 kilometers. There's this bombshell report, in my opinion, in the Wall Street Journal on how Israel is going to respond, because Israel's also been bombing Yemen. So a former Israeli diplomat, Alan Pincus, says Israel's best option for a long-term solution to the problem posed by the Houthis, Ansar Allah, might be focused on building a U.S.-led regional coalition with Gulf countries also threatened by the growing aggression of the Houthis, for example, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But this would require Israel to make difficult compromises with the Palestinians. But acting alone with the Houthis, who have snarled international trade by attacking ships in the Red Sea, Israel risks turning an international problem into its sole responsibility. Scott, we've talked a lot about the axis of resistance. What does Yemen, as an additional Ansar Allah, as an additional member of the axis of resistance, bring to the table here, as it seems that the U.S. and Israel and the forces involved in the genocide in Gaza and this regional war are scrambling to figure this out?
I have a little bit of an advantage here because I've been communicating with somebody as a journalist who is with the Yemeni government's Ministry of Information, in the Ministry of Defense, their Department of Information. And I've talked to them about Yemen's role in the axis of resistance. And while they acknowledge that they are part of what is loosely called the axis of resistance, they take umbrage at any notion that they are controlled by Iran or influenced by Iran. In fact, he emphasized several times that the decision to intervene on behalf of Palestine, which is why Yemen is doing what it's doing, was a decision made by the Yemenis without consultation with anybody. They just said, this is what we're going to do. He did not deny that since that time, that Iran has provided assistance or Iran is in consultations to coordinate, but not control. The Yemeni are doing, or the Houthi are doing what the Houthi want to do, when the Houthi want to do it, how the Houthi want to do it. The Palestine 2 hypersonic missile is a indigenous system that makes use of Iranian components in the guidance and control and things of that nature. But the Yemeni, the Houthi, have a missile production facility. They're able to produce solid propellant. This isn't stuff you produce in your bathtub. It's the safety constraints and the quality control is, has to be top notch, especially if you're, producing a hypersonic missile. But they've done this. They've produced it. So we've seen the testing of it. So it's not as though this missile comes from Iran. It's a Houthi missile, and the Houthi are going to use it the way they want to use it. So the idea that there's an indirect approach to the Houthi, meaning you can go through Iran, you can put pressure on Iran, or you can put regional pressure, is absurd. And I think anybody who thinks that the Houthi are going to flinch in the face, I mean, what is this regional alliance going to do? Has anybody looked at a map and understand why, for instance, every time the Saudis try to punch in there, they get wiped out? You're entering the territory of the Houthi, you're extending your lines of communication, and you're creating plenty of opportunity for, being pinched off, stalled, isolated, killed. The Houthi have been fighting since 2014. This war is not new to them. And they haven't been defeated. And they've been, the Israeli aircraft have different pilots, maybe a couple different electronic components. But, the F-15 is the F-15, the F-16 is the F-16. And the bombs they drop are the same bombs. So, the Houthi aren't going to lose any sleep having Israeli aircraft or American aircraft or French aircraft come at them. And the fact that they continue to fire missiles every night shows that it continues to be a very difficult thing to strike what they call mobile relocatable targets or mobile missile launchers.
You're exactly right in terms of this idea that attempting to pressure Iran or pressure what are assumed to be Yemen's Ansar Allah's adversaries like Saudi Arabia and UAE could be folly. Even Foreign Policy magazine says Yemenis do not receive or expect, this is a knock on them, the Ansar Allah to provide services like food, medical care, or education. But after a decade of bombings from Saudi Arabia, they are dug in and can absorb intense attacks, while their importance and popularity have soared with each blow. Help us understand, because in my estimation, what the Wall Street Journal said in the article I cited before, they said that in order to even get this regional coalition to work for Israel and for the United States, again, against Ansar Allah, they would have to make compromises with the Palestinians, essentially, and what probably is so, stop the genocide. So is Ansar Allah right now taking on the role, and maybe as a kind of a surprise role, of doing what the entire Axis of Resistance has been trying to do, which is stop this genocide and stop the war, and are now even getting people at very high levels of decision making and also narrative making thinking about this?
Well, I disagree with Ambassador Pincus, and I'll tell you why. Saudi Arabia has already initiated military strikes from their territory in the Houthi, including some land incursions. What compromises has Israel had to make to get Saudi Arabia to do that? The United Arab Emirates has continued to be involved in the south and looking to bring more troops in. What compromises did they have to make? I don't know where Pincus is coming from. I think, the Saudis view the Houthi as a problem. And they've been willing to fight them. They don't need Israel to tell them to fight them. And the Saudis are smart enough to know that if you jump in on, a situation where you have other powers doing the heavy lifting for you, it reduces the amount of effort you have to exert, and that's what's happened here. What compromises? Has Saudi Arabia turned around and said, before we continue to fire artillery into Yemeni territory, we need you to stop the genocide? There hasn't even been that conversation. So I don't think the Houthi are, this surprise element. I tragically think unless and it's not impossible, but unless the axis of resistance can revive itself in a different way, because it's going to be different kinds of pressure. But for instance, later this month, the ceasefire expires and Israel hasn't complied with it. Israel continues to occupy big chunks of southern Lebanon. And Hezbollah says that they will immediately begin resisting Israel's occupation. And even though Lebanon has a new president, General Aoun, the Christian, he in the past has spoken about the need to defend Lebanese sovereignty. So I don't think there's going to be pushback from much of Lebanon against any effort by Hezbollah to kick Israel out of territory Israel's illegally occupying. That's going to put pressure on Israel. We don't know, ultimately we don't know which way Iran's going to go. I have assessed, and I continue to believe that Iran is going to pick a path of negotiation with the West. But we can't pretend that, look, they just ran a major exercise, and the purpose of that exercise is to prepare them for war. And so there's a big element within Iran that not only is saying we must be prepared to defend ourselves, but if if Israel and the United States continues to, blow their horn, say we're going to attack, Iran may preempt that attack and strike first. And I think there's enough sentiment in Iran that if they feel like they're going to be attacked, then there's no sense in holding out for negotiations. You might as well get the first punch in first. So, and that would be devastating for Israel. So I think the Houthi are holding out to see what's going to happen. They are stubborn. They are morally committed to this fight. You have to give them that. They have linked, their terms are simple. Stop the genocide, get the humanitarian equipment in, and we stop doing what we're doing. And you got to admire them for that.
One of the most shocking parts about this is, as we watched Syria fall, and as we watched that ceasefire that you just described come into place relatively around the same time period, there was, of course, a lot of pessimism about the axis of resistance. And then it seemed like immediately Ansarallah said, no, actually, we're just going to increase and escalate our moves against Israel to show what it seems like it's to show. They're effective strikes in a lot of ways. They're hitting, they say they're hitting their targets. Israelis in the thousands upon thousands are running to bomb shelters. And you have major media publications talking about how do you even address this problem. Scott, how is Ansarallah able to do this? I was reading up on the Palestine 2, and their hypersonic missile has the ability to hit Israel in 11 minutes. I think that's something like over 2,000 kilometers. How are they able to do this, given that Yemen, as you mentioned, has been decimated by endless war, Saudi Arabia, UAE, US, UK, bombing campaigns, military incursions, humanitarian catastrophe that rivals what we've seen in Gaza in terms of hunger and all kinds of other maladies? How are they able to do this?
Well, I think, first of all, Yemen remains one of the most least understood of the Gulf Arab countries. When I was involved with Iraq, there was a tendency amongst the ill-informed to denigrate Iraqis as, ignorant, camel jockeys, other slurs of that nature. But the Iraqis that I met were some of the most highly educated people in the world, people who received their advanced degrees in England and in Europe, in the United States. One of the guys that I interacted with was a nuclear physicist who got his PhD in the University of Michigan, and he just loved to sit down and talk about, the Wolverines. My point is they're very, very good. And we investigated at one point in time that the Iraqis had or that the Yemenis had provided the Iraqis with an SS-21 missile. The Iraqis had never received that from the Russians, and the Iraqis were looking at reverse engineering. And the Yemenis provided it, and the Yemenis brought over some people. And the Iraqis talked about the Yemenis as being highly proficient, very capable, professionals. And I think that sometimes that's what's missing here. The Yemeni are just as well educated. They have their scientists, their engineers are people who got their advanced degrees in the West. These are peer level professionals, but we don't give them that credit. That's why we ask the question, well, how can they do this? They're just a bunch of camel jockeys that have curved swords and sandals. How in God's name can they do this? Well, they can do it because they have some extraordinarily capable people. It's a big country with a lot of resources. I have to tell you that to make a solid rocket propellant production facility, it required. Look, both Egypt and Iraq had to bring in the Germans to do it. And both Egypt and Iraq have scientists, advanced scientists and engineers, but they had to bring in a German company to actually make the facility. The Yemeni have done it on their own. And it just shows you that they are far more advanced than we, and far more sophisticated. Of course, yes, there's a tribal element to this. When you look at the fighters in the field, these are tribal fighters, et cetera. But the more you get away from the field and the more you get into the center of government, we're talking about some very sophisticated people with deep understanding of not only what their capabilities are, but what the problems they have are and what the solutions they want to achieve and how to achieve those solutions. And they've been doing this for a long time. I mean, they've been at war now for over a decade. That's all they know. That's every day, every morning they wake up, they're a nation at war, and it's the norm. And you don't survive 10 years at war unless you figure out how to do some things right. So the Yemeni are doing it right, and they're not going to be beat. It's going to be very difficult to inflict pain and suffering enough on them to get them to yield. I just don't see that happening. Israel bombed Lebanon, but Lebanon is not a homogeneous state. They bombed Lebanon. Initially, they bombed the southern Shia. And the rest of Lebanon was like, well, that's just the Shia and that's Hezbollah. But then when Israel turned up the heat and started bombing Sunnis and some Christian areas, now you saw everybody saying, hey, stop, Hezbollah, you got to stop doing what you're doing. There's no breaks like that in Yemeni in the social fabric, that you can't divide and conquer these people. When you bomb them, they all feel the bombing. It just makes them want to resist even more. Very, very tough people. And I just think we're wrong to pick the military solution. Israel could solve this problem immediately just by saying we're going to let humanitarian goods into, and Israel doesn't even have to concede any of the other things that they're doing. Simply just open up and let the humanitarian. But Israel's beyond doing the right thing right now. Israel's at the point where they are treating the Gazans as human animals, wild animals that have to be hunted down, exterminated. And if you're hunting down, exterminating wild animals, why would you bring in bags of dog food to feed them?